Morning arrived with the kind of harsh sunlight that made Chicago's autumn feel deceptive. Beautiful, but cold, promising warmth it couldn't deliver. Elena woke disoriented, her body cataloging pain before her mind registered safety. The IV line in her arm, the soft pillow beneath her head. Her daughter's small body pressed against her side, breathing steady and peaceful. It took several seconds to remember. Trey's fists. The table corner. Blood spreading across cheap linoleum. Then Sophia's voice, small but certain. "Mama, I got help." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her daughter's hair, fingers combing through the tangled strands as if confirming reality. Sophia was here. They were alive. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been since Trey moved in. No aggressive footsteps, no door slamming, no atmosphere of violence waiting to detonate. A note sat on the coffee table, elegant handwriting on expensive cardstock. "Mrs. Martinez, the moving company arrives at 10 a.m. Pack only what matters. Everything else will be provided. Your new address is included below. Trey Williams is no longer your concern. He left Chicago last night and won't return. Dr. Chen will check on you this evening. The number on the business card is for emergencies only, but it's yours if needed. MC." Below the note, an address in Lincoln Park. Elena's breath caught. Lincoln Park. One of Chicago's safest, most expensive neighborhoods. The kind of place where she'd cleaned houses as a maid, but never imagined living. Sophia stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Mama?" Her voice carried the vulnerable softness of recent sleep. "Does your head still hurt?" "A little, baby, but I'm okay." Elena pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, cheap strawberry from the dollar store, but the most precious smell in the world. "You scared me last night, running off like that." "I had to," Sophia said simply, her logic unassailable. "You were hurt, and Trey was going to come back. I couldn't protect you by myself. I'm too small." The matter-of-fact assessment of her own limitations broke Elena's heart. "So, I got someone bigger." "Sweetheart, do you understand what kind of man Mr. Castellano is?" Sophia considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "He's the kind who keeps promises," she finally answered. "He said Trey wouldn't hurt you anymore. And he's gone, isn't he? I can feel it. The apartment feels different." She was right. The oppressive weight that had saturated every corner of their home had lifted. The space breathed differently without Trey's presence poisoning the air. "Yes, baby, he's gone." "Forever?" "Forever." Sophia nodded, satisfied. Then, with the resilience of childhood, "I'm hungry. Can we have pancakes?" The normalcy of the request, the return to a world where a 6-year-old's biggest concern was breakfast rather than survival, made Elena's tears flow freely. She held her daughter tight, her body aching from more than physical injuries, mourning everything Sophia had lost by growing up too fast in an apartment where violence was routine. "Yeah, baby," Elena whispered against her daughter's hair. "We can have pancakes." The moving company arrived precisely at 10, as promised. 3 men in uniform with a truck large enough to hold everything they owned twice over. The team leader, a weathered man named Carlos, introduced himself with professional courtesy that suggested he'd been thoroughly briefed. "Mrs. Martinez, we're here to help you relocate. Pack what's important to you. Photos, documents, anything with sentimental value. We'll handle everything else. The new apartment is fully furnished, so you can leave furniture if you'd like." Elena moved through the apartment like a ghost, gathering pieces of their life. Photo albums from before Trey, Sophia's artwork from school, the silver bracelet her grandmother had given her. Everything fit into 2 boxes. A decade of existence reduced to objects small enough to carry. Sophia clutched her pink purse throughout, the $3 still inside. Elena had tried to convince her to keep the money Mr. Castellano had left, The envelope contained $2,000 in cash, but Sophia had refused. I paid him with my money, Mama. That other money is for you. For rent and food and maybe a new winter coat for me, because mine has holes in the sleeves. The observation stabbed through Elena. Her daughter had noticed her coat was inadequate for Chicago winter, but hadn't complained until now, when asking seemed safe again. By noon, they stood in the doorway of apartment 304 for the last time. Elena had lived here for 3 years, through losing her job, meeting Trey, enduring months of escalating abuse. The walls held ghosts of screamed arguments and whispered apologies, of nights spent calculating how to escape, and mornings spent pretending everything was fine. Goodbye, Sophia said to the empty rooms, her small voice carrying ritual weight. We're not coming back. No, baby. We're never coming back. Carlos drove them personally in his truck, the company van following with their 2 boxes of belongings. The journey from the Riverside Apartments to Lincoln Park took 20 minutes, but crossed sociological boundaries that normally remained impenetrable. From poverty to privilege, from danger to security, from the Chicago that tourists never saw to the Chicago featured in architectural magazines. The new building was everything Elena had imagined wealthy people took for granted. A doorman who greeted them warmly, a lobby with actual artwork on the walls, elevators that worked smoothly without groaning protests, hallways carpeted instead of stained concrete, the absence of graffiti and broken lights, and the smell of garbage that permeated the Riverside complex. Apartment 5B occupied a corner unit with windows facing both east and south, flooding the space with natural light. 2 bedrooms, Sophia would have her own, room for the first time in her life. Hardwood floors, recently refinished. Appliances that matched and functioned. Furniture that wasn't secondhand or broken. A kitchen with cabinets that closed properly and counters without water damage. But what made Elena's breath catch was the smaller details. Fresh flowers in a vase on the dining table. A bowl of fruit. Actual fresh fruit. Expensive in autumn. The refrigerator stocked with basics. Milk, eggs, bread, cheese, vegetables. Cleaning supplies under the sink. Towels in the bathroom. Thick and soft. Sheets on the beds. A thread count Elena had only seen in stores she couldn't afford to shop in. Someone had anticipated their needs with meticulous care. Not just shelter, but a home ready to be lived in immediately. Sophia ran through the apartment with the unleashed energy of a child discovering unexpected treasure. Mama, look. My room has a closet, a real closet with a door. Such a simple thing, but at the Riverside Apartments, they'd shared a single broken wardrobe in Elena's bedroom, clothes piled in corners because there was no proper storage. Carlos placed their 2 boxes in the living room. The superintendent is Mr. Chen, no relation to the doctor, he said, with a slight smile that suggested he'd been instructed to make that clarification. He's on the 1st floor if you need anything. Your rent is managed through the property management company. You don't need to worry about monthly payments. Elena's stomach tightened. For how long? Carlos consulted a paper, though Elena suspected he'd memorized the answer. The lease is paid through the end of next year. After that, you'll receive information about renewal terms. 14 months of security, time to heal, find work, rebuild. Elena's hands trembled as she accepted the keys Carlos offered. 2 sets, brass instead of cheap steel, attached to key rings that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget used to be. There's one more thing, Carlos said, producing an envelope from his jacket. Mr. Castellano wanted you to have this. Inside, Elena found a letter of recommendation on professional letterhead from Castellano Industries. Apparently, Marcus owned several legitimate businesses alongside his criminal enterprises. The letter praised her work ethic, reliability, and customer service skills, recommending her for administrative or management positions. It was complete fiction, but printed on expensive paper with contact information that would verify the employment history if called. Beneath the letter, information for 3 job interviews scheduled for the following week: office manager at a medical practice, administrative assistant at a law firm, receptionist at an architecture company, all positions that paid living wages with benefits, all employers who apparently owed Marcus Castellano favors. He didn't have to do this, Elena whispered, overwhelmed by the thoroughness of the arrangements. Mr. Castellano believes in completing what he starts, Carlos replied diplomatically. Then softer. Between you and me, Mrs. Martinez, I've worked for him for 8 years. I've seen him do a lot of things. This, he gestured at the apartment. This is different. Your daughter impressed him. That doesn't happen often. After Carlos left, Elena and Sophia explored their new home with the careful wonder of people afraid to break the spell. Sophia discovered a box in her room that hadn't been there during their initial walkthrough, a welcome gift with her name written in elegant script on the attached card. Inside, new school clothes in her size, a warm winter coat with no holes, shoes that fit properly, and a hardcover book about a brave girl who saved her kingdom. The inscription on the book's first page read, "For Sophia, who proved that courage comes in all sizes, MC." Sophia held the book like a treasure, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Mama, can you read it to me?" "Of course, baby." They curled up together on the new sofa, soft cushions that didn't sag, fabric without stains or cigarette burns. Elena read about princesses and dragons and impossible quests, while her daughter listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting with questions or observations that revealed how deeply she'd been thinking about the past 24 hours. "Mama," Sophia said during a pause in the story, "Mr. Castellano is like the dragon in the book." Elena frowned, concerned about the metaphor. "What do you mean?" "Everyone's scared of the dragon because he's big and dangerous. But in the story, the dragon protects the village from the bad knights. He's scary, but he's also good. That's Mr. Castellano. He's scary to bad people, but good to people who need help." The child's understanding of moral complexity, that people could be simultaneously dangerous and protective, that fear and gratitude could coexist, spoke to an emotional intelligence developed through necessity. Elena wanted to argue that the world wasn't that simple, that men like Marcus Castellano couldn't be reduced to fairy tale dragons. But Sophia was 6, and she'd earned the right to her hopeful interpretation after everything she'd endured. "Maybe you're right, baby," Elena conceded, continuing the story until Sophia fell asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by moving day and the emotional weight of their transformation. Elena carried her daughter to the new bedroom, tucking her under clean sheets that smelled of lavender fabric softener. She stood in the doorway watching Sophia sleep. Truly sleep, without the tension that had characterized her rest at the riverside apartments where danger could return at any moment. Dr. Chen arrived at 6, as promised, carrying her medical bag and a casserole dish covered in foil. "Lasagna," she explained, setting it on the kitchen counter. "Figured you wouldn't feel like cooking tonight." The examination took 15 minutes. Dr. Chen checked Elena's pupils, tested her reflexes, examined the head wound that was healing cleanly despite its severity. "You're lucky," the doctor pronounced. "Another inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation. Your daughter saved your life by getting help when she did." "I know," Elena whispered. "I just wish she'd never had to." "But she did. And she handled it with more grace than most adults would." Dr. Chen packed her equipment efficiently. "Mr. Castellano has asked me to continue monitoring your recovery. I'll visit twice a week for the next month. Then we'll reassess. There's no charge. It's part of your arrangement." "Why is he doing all this?" The question burst out, weeks of gratitude and confusion and fear culminating in desperate need to understand. Dr. Chen considered her answer carefully. I've known Marcus for 15 years. I've patched up his people after gang wars, treated victims of his organization's activities, and watched him build an empire on violence and intimidation. In all that time, I've never seen him do something purely because it was right. Until last night. What changed? Your daughter reminded him why power exists, Dr. Chen said simply. Not just to accumulate more power, but to protect people who can't protect themselves. She showed him $3 and more courage than his armed enforcers display, and something in that gesture reached whatever part of him still remembers being human. After the doctor left, Elena heated the lasagna and called Sophia for dinner. They ate at the dining table, an actual table with matching chairs instead of mismatched furniture salvaged from curbs, and talked about inconsequential things: school assignments, upcoming holidays, whether they should get a cat now that they had space and permission. Normal conversation, the kind families had when survival wasn't their primary concern. That night, Elena lay in bed staring at shadows on the ceiling cast by streetlights that actually worked. The apartment felt too quiet after years of thin walls that transmitted every neighbor's argument and every siren's wail. The absence of ambient threat was itself disorienting, her nervous system calibrated for danger, struggling to accept safety. Her phone, a new smartphone that had been waiting on the kitchen counter with a note explaining the number remained the same, but the device was secure, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Martinez, this is Vincent. I work for Mr. Castellano. My team will maintain discreet security on your building for the next 6 months. You won't see us, but we're there. If you notice anything concerning, call the number on his card immediately. Rest well. You've earned it. The knowledge that armed guards monitored her building should have been terrifying. Instead, Elena felt the first genuine relaxation she'd experienced in months. Somewhere in Chicago's network of power and violence, Marcus Castellano had decided she and Sophia were worth protecting, and his word carried absolute weight. She thought about Sophia's $3, still in the pink purse hanging on her daughter's new bedroom door. Payment for services rendered. A contract fulfilled with interest that would compound for years through safety and opportunity Elena never could have provided alone. The cost of that protection, Trey Williams's disappearance from their lives, sat uncomfortably in her conscience. She wasn't naive enough to believe he'd simply chosen to leave. Men like Trey didn't surrender control voluntarily. Marcus had either scared him so thoroughly that running seemed preferable to death, or had eliminated the choice entirely. Elena realized with disturbing clarity that she didn't care which option had occurred. Her daughter would grow up without watching her mother being beaten. That outcome justified whatever darkness had unfolded in its creation. She fell asleep holding the business card Marcus had left, his private number both lifeline and reminder that their salvation had come from a source textbooks would call evil, but her daughter called good. 6 weeks passed with the strange adjustment of people learning to live without constant fear. Sophia thrived with a stability she'd never known. Regular meals, warm clothes, a bedroom where she could close the door and feel safe. Her teacher reported she'd started smiling more, participating in class discussions, playing with other children instead of sitting alone at recess cataloging threats. Elena started working as an office manager at the medical practice, the job interview facilitated by Marcus's letter of recommendation going smoother than she'd dared hope. The salary wasn't extraordinary, but combined with the subsidized rent, it allowed her to rebuild savings and plan for a future beyond day-to-day survival. She'd seen Marcus exactly once since that night, a chance encounter at the downtown coffee shop near her office. He'd been with 2 men she recognized from the restaurant, discussing something that made them all lean close with serious expressions. When Elena approached to thank him, Marcus had simply nodded acknowledgement, asked if she and Sophia were well, and excused himself before she could articulate the gratitude that felt inadequate for everything he'd provided. The interaction lasted 90 seconds, but Elena understood its message. Their business was concluded. He'd fulfilled his obligation. Any further contact would transform their transaction into something more complicated, potentially dangerous for everyone involved. Sophia asked about Mr. Castellano occasionally, wondering if they should send a thank you card or invite him to her birthday party in December. Elena gently explained that some gifts came with the expectation of distance rather than relationship, that the best way to honor his help was to build the life he'd made possible. Trey Williams became a ghost, his absence confirmed through Rose's connection to neighborhood gossip. Nobody had seen him since the night Elena was injured. His belongings had been cleared from the old apartment. His phone number no longer worked. One of Rose's cousins who drank at O'Malley's pub mentioned seeing Trey leave with a man in an expensive suit, looking scared enough to piss himself. That was the last confirmed sighting. Detective Morrison from the Domestic Violence Unit had called once, following up on a hospital report filed anonymously about Elena's injuries. She'd told him the truth, that Trey was gone, and she had no interest in pressing charges against someone who no longer posed a threat. Morrison hadn't pushed, his tone suggesting he understood more than he acknowledged about how certain problems in Chicago got solved outside official channels. November arrived with early snow and the annual approach of holidays Elena could finally afford to celebrate properly. She'd already bought Sophia a new winter coat, a real one from an actual store, with a hood that didn't have holes. She'd started researching summer camps for the following year, opportunities for Sophia to be a child rather than a survivor. The transformation felt fragile, like an illusion that might shatter if examined too closely. But each week that passed without violence or crisis reinforced its reality. They were safe. They were rebuilding. And while the foundation of that safety rested on Marcus Castellano's particular brand of protection, Elena had learned that survival sometimes required accepting help from unconventional sources. December arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made Chicago feel like punishment for geographic choices. Elena bundled Sophia in her new coat, watching her daughter skip toward the school bus stop with energy that spoke of security and proper nutrition, and the confidence that came from sleeping without nightmares. The mail that morning included an envelope with no return address, expensive paper, and her name written in the same elegant script from the moving day note. Inside, a brief message. Mrs. Martinez, your first year's lease ends next December. Should you choose to renew, the terms will transition to market rate, which your current salary should cover comfortably. The security detail concluded last week. You no longer need external protection. The strength you and your daughter possess is sufficient. I wish you both well. MC. Beneath the note, a small photograph. Sophia at the restaurant that night. Her small hand placing $3 on the table, her face set with determination and terror and hope combined. The image captured everything. The moment desperation became courage, when a child's love for her mother transformed into action that saved both their lives. Elena taped the photograph to their refrigerator, next to Sophia's A+ spelling test and her crayon drawing of their new apartment labeled Home Sweet Home in uneven letters. The pictures served as a reminder of how far they'd come, but also of the cost. Somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Castellano continued building his empire through violence and intimidation and calculated power. But for one night, that power had been used to save rather than destroy, to protect rather than threaten, to honor a 6-year-old girl's desperate contract paid with everything she owned. Elena had read enough about organized crime to know that Marcus's reputation probably benefited from their story. People would whisper about his mercy, about how even he couldn't resist a child's plea, about the code of honor that existed among criminals when it served their purposes. The narrative would spread, carefully managed by his people, painting him as dangerous but principled. a useful mythology for a man whose business relied on fear tempered with respect. She didn't care about the politics of his reputation management. He'd saved their lives, and his motivations mattered less than the outcome. That evening, after Sophia finished homework and dinner, Elena brought out the pink purse that still held 3 crumpled dollar bills. She'd preserved them as evidence of something important, though she wasn't entirely sure what. "Baby," Elena said, sitting beside her daughter on the sofa. "Do you remember what you told Mr. Castellano that night? What you said that made him decide to help us?" Sophia thought carefully, her small face scrunched with concentration. "I told him I needed to hire him to save you. I showed him my $3. And then—" She paused, remembering. "Then I told him about Trey hurting you, and I said I paid him so he had to help because that's how business works." "Is that all?" "No." Sophia's voice grew quieter. "When he asked if I understood what it meant when he helped people, I said I understood. And then I told him that if he made Trey stop hurting you, that meant you got to live, which meant it was okay whatever he did." The words hung in the air. A 6-year-old girl's permission for violence, her blessing for whatever darkness unfolded in her name. Elena pulled her daughter close, understanding that Sophia would carry that authorization her entire life. The knowledge that she'd hired someone to potentially kill another person, that her $3 had purchased not just safety, but possibly death. "Mama," Sophia whispered, "did Mr. Castellano kill Trey?" The question was inevitable, though Elena had hoped it would come later when Sophia was older and better equipped to process moral complexity. But her daughter had earned honest answers through bearing adult burdens. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. Maybe not. What I do know is that Trey was going to kill me if someone didn't stop him. You understood that, and you did the only thing you could do. Whatever happened to Trey, that's on him for making you desperate enough to ask a stranger for help." "I'm not sorry," Sophia said firmly. "Even if he died, even if that makes me bad, I'm not sorry you're alive." Elena's tears fell silently, mourning the innocence her daughter had sacrificed, while simultaneously grateful for the fierce love that had motivated that sacrifice. "You're not bad, sweetheart. You're the bravest person I've ever known." They sat together as evening darkened into night, the apartment warm and secure around them, the future stretching ahead with possibilities that hadn't existed before. A child decided $3 could buy salvation. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, winter releasing its grip one grudging degree at a time. Elena had been promoted to assistant practice manager at the medical office, her efficiency and dedication recognized with increased responsibility and salary. Sophia had completed first grade with perfect attendance and academic achievement that suggested the stable home environment was translating into educational success. On a Saturday in April, Elena received a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Vincent. Mr. Castellano wanted you to know that Trey Williams was arrested in Phoenix 3 weeks ago for assaulting his new girlfriend. He'll be in prison for the next 8 years. The option he chose that night was leaving Chicago and continuing his pattern elsewhere. Mr. C wanted you to know you were right to be afraid and right to accept help. He also wanted you to know he made a phone call to the Phoenix prosecutor offering evidence from a Chicago case. Trey won't hurt anyone else for a very long time." Elena read the message 3 times, processing its implications. Trey had lived. Marcus had kept his word about offering choice rather than death, but he'd also ensured that even Trey's survival came with consequences, that the mercy extended that night didn't mean freedom to continue destroying women. She showed the message to Sophia, who was drawing at the kitchen table. Bright colors depicting flowers and sunshine and the general optimism of 7-year-olds who'd found safety. "Trey's in jail," Elena explained. "Mr. Castellano made sure he can't hurt anyone for a long time." Sophia nodded, processing the information with the seriousness it deserved. "Good. That's better than dead, I think." Because if he's in jail, maybe he can learn to be better. If he was dead, he couldn't learn anything. The philosophy of a second grader, offering redemption even to men who'd threatened her mother's life. Elena marveled at how Sophia had managed to retain hope and faith in human potential despite everything she'd witnessed. "You know what, baby?" Elena said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "You're going to grow up to be an amazing person, strong and brave and still kind. That's rare." "I learned from you, Mama," Sophia replied, returning the embrace. "You never stopped being kind even when Trey was mean. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being hard." That afternoon, Elena drafted a letter she never sent but needed to write. "Mr. Castellano, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to say things that weren't appropriate when we met at the coffee shop. My daughter gave you $3 and you gave us back our lives. You provided safety, housing, employment, and a future we never could have built alone. I know you're not a hero in the traditional sense. I know your business involves things I'll never understand and probably couldn't condone. But for one night, your power served something good and pure, and I'll never forget that. Sophia asks about you sometimes. She calls you the dragon who protects people, referencing a book you gave her that she's read 17 times. She doesn't understand the full complexity of what you do, and I hope she never needs to. But she understands that you helped when no one else would. I teach her every day that the world contains both darkness and light, sometimes in the same person, and that courage means asking for help even when you're scared of the source. You taught her that $3 and bravery can change everything. Thank you for honoring her payment. Thank you for seeing her desperation as worthy of your attention. Thank you for letting us rebuild. We're going to make you proud, not through gratitude or obligation, but by building lives worthy of the gift you gave us. Respectfully, Elena Martinez." She folded the letter and placed it in the back of her desk drawer, unaddressed and unmailed. Some things needed saying but not sending. The act of writing crystallized her thoughts, but their relationship, such as it was, functioned better with distance. Sophia's 7th birthday arrived on December 22nd, exactly 1 year after she'd walked into Salvatore's restaurant with $3 and impossible courage. Elena planned a small party, classmates from school, cake, presents that reflected their improved circumstances without being excessive. The doorbell rang during the party as children played pin the tail on the donkey and consumed alarming quantities of sugar. Elena answered to find a delivery man holding a large box wrapped in silver paper with an envelope attached. The card read simply, "Happy birthday, Sophia. May you never need to be that brave again, but knowing you could be if necessary. MC." Inside the box, a leather-bound journal with Sophia's name embossed in gold on the cover, and a note explaining that brave people throughout history had documented their stories so others could learn from them. The first page contained a single handwritten sentence. "This is the story of a girl who saved her mother with $3 and taught a dragon to remember why he had wings." Beneath the journal, the $3 bills Sophia had offered that night, pressed flat, preserved in a clear case, mounted like the treasure they represented. Elena watched her daughter hold the money with reverence, understanding somehow that this was more than paper currency. It was proof that she'd been brave when it mattered, that her desperate gamble had paid off, that sometimes, impossible, things happened when courage met opportunity. "Mama," Sophia said quietly, studying the preserved bills, "I want to keep this forever. So when I'm grown up and scared about something, I can remember that I was brave once, and I can be brave again." "That's a beautiful idea, baby." The party continued with cake and presents and the beautiful chaos of children celebrating. But Elena's eyes kept returning to the leather journal, its presence a reminder that their story had mattered to someone powerful enough to choose which stories survived and which disappeared into Chicago's violent history. That night, after guests left and Sophia slept surrounded by new toys and the full belly of a child who'd never gone hungry, Elena stood at the window watching snow fall across Lincoln Park. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Castellano was probably conducting business that would horrify her if she knew details. But for one moment a year ago, his particular form of power had intersected with her particular form of desperation, and the collision had created something rare: protection without exploitation, mercy without expectation, help that asked nothing in return except the continuation of lives that might have ended on a blood-stained floor. She thought about Trey in his Phoenix prison cell, his pattern of violence finally interrupted by consequences. She thought about Sophia sleeping safely, her biggest worry whether she'd remember show and tell on Monday. She thought about the apartment they'd left behind, apartment 304 in the Riverside complex, now rented to another struggling family who had no idea of the violence its walls had witnessed, or the transformation its tragedy had catalyzed. The business card with Marcus's private number remained in her wallet, preserved but unused. She'd never called, never needed to activate the emergency line he'd provided. The security of his reputation, the knowledge that Elena Martinez and her daughter were under his protection, had been sufficient to keep new threats from materializing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rosa, checking in as she did weekly, her friendship undimmed by the mystery of what exactly had happened that night. Elena typed a quick response confirming they were well, sharing photos from the party, maintaining the fiction that their transformation had been luck and hard work rather than criminal intervention. Some truths were too complicated to share. Outside, the city glittered with holiday lights, each illuminated window representing a story she'd never know. How many other desperate people negotiated with dangerous powers tonight? How many other impossible choices were being made in apartments and alleys across Chicago? How many other children were watching their parents suffer and calculating whether $3 could buy salvation? Elena didn't have answers. She only knew that when her daughter had needed help, she'd found it in the most unlikely source. That Marcus Castellano, Chicago's wolf, had chosen mercy over profit, protection over exploitation, had used his power to build rather than destroy. In the morning, she would take Sophia to Sunday brunch, then ice skating at Millennium Park, celebrating the ordinary joy of a 7-year-old's birthday weekend. They would laugh and eat too much and remember why surviving had been worth the cost. But tonight, Elena allowed herself to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that made liberal guilt recoil. Sometimes salvation came from dark sources. Sometimes violence prevented greater violence, and sometimes a criminal with a code proved more reliable than systems designed to protect, but failing spectacularly. She thought of Sophia's description, the dragon who protects people, and recognized its accuracy. Marcus Castellano was dangerous, his empire built on fear and force, and activities that destroyed other families while saving hers. But for one night, his fire had burned away a threat instead of creating one. The snow continued falling, covering the city in temporary purity that would last until morning when traffic and dirt turned it gray. But for now, Chicago gleamed white and innocent, beautiful in its deception. Elena closed the curtains and went to bed, sleeping soundly in an apartment she'd never imagined affording, protected by shadows she'd never fully understand, grateful for $3 that had bought so much more than any rational calculation suggested possible. In her room, Sophia dreamed of dragons and princesses and the complicated truth that sometimes the scariest creatures made the best protectors. The leather journal waited on her nightstand, its blank pages ready to hold the story of a girl who'd learned that courage sometimes meant doing terrifying things because the alternative was worse. And somewhere in Chicago, Marcus Castellano, the wolf, the dragon, the criminal with occasional moments of grace, continued building his empire. Forever marked by the night, a 6-year-old girl reminded him that power without purpose was just violence, and that $3 from the right person could be worth more than millions from the wrong ones. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.